Good afternoon. I'm Melissa Samuels, Director of Alumni Programs at the Albany Alumni Association. Let me briefly introduce our presenter, Jason Benitez, classes of 99, 2000, and 2001, is Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Capital Region Chamber. He's responsible for assisting businesses and organizations with their DEI goals and implementation of the Chamber's diversity and inclusion initiatives. Jason worked for over 15 years in higher education, including at Albany. We were lucky to have him here. And more recently at Union College, where he served as Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion. So Jason, welcome and thank you for joining us today. I will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and good afternoon to my Great Dane family, my Albany family. I want to give a particular shout out to my EOP family and also Residence Life and Student Affairs family. As Melissa mentioned, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I went to South Shore High School, and I came up to Albany in the mid-90s as a EOP student, Educational Opportunity Program. I want to specifically shout out that program because I would not be standing before you today had it not been for the opportunity that that program provided me. And I say that in the backdrop of programs like that being challenged and cut across the country. So in many ways, please know that I would not be here had it not been for the opportunities that the University at Albany and specifically the Educational Opportunity Program has provided. So with that, I'd like to get into it. I have a lot of content. Again, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, so I talk really fast. So please hope you can all keep up today. But I'm going to share my screen here and make sure I share the appropriate one. Okay, I believe I have. All right, and kind of get right into some of the content here. But I hope everybody's, ready for an engaging afternoon and an engaged topic. And we'll jump right into it. Small acts, big impact, addressing microaggressions in the workplace. You may have heard about this term, microaggressions. Sometimes we're not sure what they are, how to challenge them. They can seem very small at times, and that is true, but they can contribute to a lack of an inclusive workplace if they're not addressed. So we'll go into it a little bit today. And again, forgive me if I'm talking fast, but there is a lot of content to cover today. So with that, the goals for today are to create an awareness by defining what microaggressions are in their various forms, exploring outcomes associated with experiencing microaggressions in the workplace, discovering tips, tactics, and tools that we can respond as well as minimize. And all of this is important as professionals to remain on a path of cultural competency and responsiveness. And this is the reason why we delve into this topic. Again, I come from higher ed and I ran a multicultural office for several years. And, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, students, particularly students of color, predominantly white institutions, in a way to kind of raise awareness about the behaviors that they experience and situations that they experience. They produced this video, this picture campaign on Instagram and on social media where they simply held up dry erase boards with actual phrases that had been said to them. So I share that, and I realize this might be in the way now that I'm kind of looking at my screen a little bit more carefully, but I say that to say, I use this as an example. This was a great way for these students to kind of raise awareness around things that were actually happening to them. So we're going to talk about what microaggressions are, who typically experiences them, and what can we do about them. So with that, what I want to ask folks, having seen that, had this been an in-person session, we'd be able to engage a lot more deeply around, kind of the conversation piece. But I'm going to ask if folks have a quick one sentence microaggression that they've experienced in the workplace or otherwise. I'm asking them to throw that in the chat space. So it can be a time that you had something said to you, you're not sure how to respond to it. But please, if you have a one sentence, it could be like the colleague that always has to touch my hair, or the colleague that has said this. So I'm asking folks to just take a moment and we'll kind of monitor the chat space to see if where are you from? You speak so well. Okay, I see. Yes, those are common. That's a man's job. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just kind of scrolling through them here. You speak so well. Are you support staff? Okay. You sound white. It's a good thing. Okay, great. So if we were in a college setting, I would be giving you snaps, for those that work in colleges, and you know that snaps is a way of demonstrating silent applause. But, I think the fact that you were all able to populate, or many of you were able to populate statements in the chat space shows me that these things happen and folks are familiar with experiencing them. So let's talk about how we can begin to identify and address them. So microaggressions defined. The term microaggressions was coined in 1970 by psychiatrist and Harvard University professor Chester Pierce, but the work and awareness was more contemporarily advanced by Dr. Daryl Wang Su out of Columbia Teachers College in New York City. So again, in order to kind of break up some of the speaking, I'm going to show a brief video here. And I just have to stop this share and then share another screen here with the video from Dr. Wang Su that really does a good job of explaining this here.
Good day, everyone. My name is Daryl Wang Su, and I am a professor of psychology and education at Teachers College, Columbia University. I am also author of Microaggressions in Everyday Life and Microaggressions and Marginality. Today, I would like to share with you some of the harmful impact that microaggressions have on marginalized groups in our society. But what are microaggressions? Well, microaggressions are the everyday slights, indignities, put-downs, and insults that people of color, women, LGBT populations, or those who are marginalized experience in their day-to-day interactions with people. Microaggressions oftentimes appear to be a compliment, but contain a meta-communication or a hidden insult to the target groups in which it is delivered. People who engage in microaggressions are ordinary folks who experience themselves as good, moral, decent individuals. Microaggressions occur because they are outside the level of conscious awareness of the perpetrator. In this scene, Michael, an Asian American graduate student, is receiving academic counseling from his sponsor. They have a pleasant conversation. At the end of their meeting, the advisor delivers what he believes to be a compliment to Michael by stating, quote, "You know you speak excellent English," end quote. Michael is disturbed because it seems to imply that he is not a true American and that he is a perpetual alien in his own country. Microaggressions can also be delivered non-verbally through unconscious behaviors or gestures. In this scene, Jenny has finished a late night at the office and awaits the elevator. As the door opens, she takes one step forward, sees a black male rider, hesitates, and immediately clutches her purse and places her hand over her necklace. The hidden communication is that African Americans are prone to crime, will break the law, are up to no good, and will steal. Gender microaggressions occur also frequently to women. In this scene, Laura, a female manager, sits with her male colleagues in a meeting with the president. Note that the men tend to talk to one another, cut her off in mid-sentence, and that the president addresses only the males in the group. When Laura attempts to contribute to the discussion, she is oftentimes ignored. In one case, a male colleague checks his phone rather than listen. What can each and every one of us do to combat microaggressions? We need to realize that microaggressions are unconscious manifestations of a worldview of inclusion, exclusion, superiority, inferiority. Thus, our major task is to make the invisible visible. There are, in essence, 5 things that we need to do individually. First, learn from constant vigilance of your own biases and fears. Second, experiential reality is important in interacting with people who differ from you in terms of race, culture, ethnicity. Thirdly, don't be defensive. Fourthly, be open to discussing your own attitudes and biases and how they might have hurt others or in some sense revealed bias on your part. Lastly, it is very important to be an ally. Stand personally against all forms of bias and discrimination.
So I hope that that was informative. And as Dr. excuse me, as Dr. Wang Su points out in the video, these are behavioral, verbal, or an environmental slight, often automatic and unintentional. They can occur to folks on a brief or daily basis. And over time, they communicate a hostile, derogatory, negative viewpoint, and it does perpetuate a view of exclusion, inclusion, or supremacy, superiority. So types of microaggressions, and there are a few different types. Microassault, is often intentional verbal or nonverbal attacks that are clearly intended to offend a recipient through name calling, avoidant behavior, or purposeful discriminatory acts. These are usually less common than other forms of microaggressions, are more deliberate, conscious and explicit, and their intention is to hurt, discriminate, or exclude. An example could be refusing services to someone based on their gender expression or sexual orientation. A micro insult is a subtle snub or humiliation that conveys demeaning message to the recipient in a way that may be unintentional to the offender. It can convey insensitivity, be rude, or demean an individual's identity or heritage. For example, complimenting somebody by saying, "You are so articulate." I cannot believe in 2024 that we have folks that don't understand how that seemingly well-meaning term can come off as a backhanded kind of comment. The underlying message when you say that somebody's articulate is that you did not expect them to sound so educated when they speak. A micro-invalidation is aimed to exclude, negate, or dismiss thoughts, feelings, or experiences of another person. An example might be an Asian American individual who was born and raised in the United States is complimented for speaking good English. Micro insults and micro invalidations are often not intentional and typically occur due to underlying biases and prejudices that we all have that kind of lie outside of our awareness. Environmental microaggression is when micro assaults, micro insults, and micro invalidations are reflected in the culture, process, and climate of the workplace. An example might be, are some members of groups overrepresented in pictures or marketing materials to the exclusion of other groups? So I mentioned bias a few moments ago, and bias awareness is certainly central to this conversation. There has been a lot of work and awareness raised around bias, particularly in the last 5 years or so. So in the interest of time, we're not going to delve too much into bias this afternoon, but I will take a moment to quickly frame what implicit or unconscious bias is. I'd like to say, think of bias like a lens or a filter through which you view, perceive, and engage with the world. We all have a different type of prescription, if you will, to the lenses that we look through. These lenses are created and formed by our lived experiences, the messages we receive from others, including the media, and through the unique paths that we all travel on this road called life, relative to our identities and socioeconomic status. Through those lenses, through our individual lenses, we then begin to adopt attitudes and assumptions that become part of our belief system, ingrained in us, and how we view the others in the world around us. So to go a step further, our personally held biases then operate and interact within larger cultural, social, economic systems, which we are all a part of. So I like to say when I do these trainings that we can almost be guaranteed that wherever there is human involvement in decision-making at play, that we can know for certain that bias has the potential to be a factor in that decision or that process. We're all cogs in a system, right? We each play a role at your job, at your home, in your community. And we each play a role, right? You might be a cog, you might be a gear, you might be a wheel, but we're all in this system. And bias that we have individually has the potential of entering that system. So this is where we begin to talk about system-wide or institutional bias or discrimination, but that's certainly a workshop for another day. So about bias to end, I just want to say we all have them, each and every one of us on this call. Bias in and of itself is not necessarily a negative thing. Our challenge is to internally examine which biases we may hold and to be intentional about not letting our biases impact our overt decisions, actions, and behaviors. So I'd like to re-stress that if our biases are not in check or within our view or challenge, they can often lead to microaggressive behaviors. Microaggressions can have both individual and organizational impacts. While anyone can be on the negative end of microaggressive behavior, in my experience, microaggressions are disproportionately experienced by non-dominant groups. Depending on the setting, this can be women, people of color, LGBTQIA+, foreign immigrants, and a number of other minoritized groups. Unaddressed microaggressions can also have team-wide, organization-wide impacts. So as employers and supervisors and leaders of a team, anybody that on this call that leads a team or that's in a supervisor, I ask you to ask yourself, is there something about your specific team or company culture that prevents your staff from bringing or being their best selves on a daily basis? Many times, people might not be displaying the best productivity, and it could be related to smaller incidents that they're experiencing in the workplace that's affecting their performance. So are any of your staff experiencing off-putting, othering, or otherwise discriminatory scenarios in the workplace? And how does that impact the employee's satisfaction, engagement, and retention? If there's an underlying presence of these factors there, it can begin to impact performance. But what I'd like to say is, when a plant or a tree that you're growing in your yard does not bear the fruits or the flowers that you know it can, what do? We don't chop the tree down, right? We look at the environment. We look at the quality of the soil. How much or how little is that plant being watered? Does it have the nutrients it needs to thrive and survive? So again, I'm big on metaphors, and I think metaphors make the content stick. So if you think of it that way, if you have an employee that's not producing the results that you want, are they getting everything they need? You know, I would discourage considering punitive actions and actually look at the environment in which that employee is asked to operate in. So a few things to think about. Are we using inclusive language on our website, publications, hiring, and onboarding materials? Are you using outdated terms for social groups, even the term minorities? I've been in DEI work for 15 plus years, and I still am not happy with all the language. We use a lot of deficit language in DEI, under-resourced, underserved, marginalized. So if it goes without saying that if there's a group that's under-resourced, there has to be a group that's over-resourced or overrepresented, but we never hear those terms. You don't hear overrepresented, over-resourced. It's deficit language. So even the term minorities is not statistically accurate in some spaces where the number of BIPOC folks might actually statistically outnumber the number of whites. Do you refer to a mixed gendered group as guys? That's a big one. That's an easy one for you all to take today. I hear that so often where you might be talking to a mixed gendered group of folks and you say, hey guys, you ready to go to lunch? And it's kind of accepted in our society. I flipped that on some young men at college and I said, hey gals, you ready to go to this meeting? And almost immediately these young men kind of looked at me like I was, saying something crazy. And it's because they're not used to hearing that. But how often are we referring to a mixed gender group of people and saying guys? Are you even prepared to discuss and address DEI issues that may arise in the workplace? I know a lot of folks are in this place where they are scared to say the wrong thing, so they don't say anything, but silence and not addressing these issues is not the right way to go. Do you learn the names of all your staff and coworkers and pronounce them correctly? That's a huge one, particularly for foreign-born employees that might not have what, I guess, lack of a better term, an American name. I find it interesting that particularly Asian, colleague in the higher ed setting, there was a student who said, oh, just call me Daisy, but that wasn't the name on her birth certificate. That wasn't the name she was given at birth. And when I asked her and got to know her a little more, it's not that she didn't want to be called by her birth name. It's that she picked an American sounding name to make it easier for her colleagues and professors to identify her. So think about that for a minute. Think about that student not being able to bring their whole self, not being able to use the name that was given to them, how they have to check a piece of their identity at the door or their self at the door when they come into that class or that workplace setting, and how over time that begins to chip away. I think about my queer colleagues that may not be out at work And every day when they get to that workplace, they're checking a huge component of their identity at the door as they come in. And it might be due to the fact that they don't feel safe or comfortable being out at work. So that's more of a workplace setting rather than that's a more of a workplace issue rather than the issue of the employee. So just some things to think about. Do you treat all your staff and employees equitably? Do you make less eye contact with some individuals? Do you respond differently to white colleagues compared to BIPOC colleagues, women compared to men? So those are some things to think about. Have one more video here.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem,
Oh, you're so well spoken.
just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while,
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland?
sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date,
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
going grocery shopping,
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
commuting to work,
So when are you gonna have a baby?
watching TV,
We have to keep the Redskins name. It's part of our culture and history.
or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
Do you know John? Give me shopping advice. I love Cher too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every day,
Can I touch your hair?
multiple times a day,
So pretty. Can
Can I
touch
touch it,
your hair,
please? Can I please?
is annoying and makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes, which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares? Just another angry black woman.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try this challenging major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
He looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
All right. Clearly, exaggerated for comedic purposes, but I think that video does a good job of expressing some of those microaggressions and what they're like to experience. Just to finish on the individual consequences or the psychological consequences, in the research and getting ready for today, I found a lot of literature that just goes to show that when microaggressions are pervasive in a workplace, it can begin to have psychological consequences on an individual that range from anxiety to depression, sleep difficulties, diminished confidence, hopelessness, loss of drive, intrusive cognitions, or what some of the literature calls the internal dilemma, diminished cognition. And I will say that unaddressed microaggressions can breed and feed imposter syndrome, particularly in underrepresented employees. So, the internal dilemma, I'm going to, if folks can just maybe, relate to this in some way by, snapping or raising your hand. But these are some things, when you begin to experience microaggressions in the workplace, these are some things that can be revolving in your head as you walk into the workplace every day. Did I interpret that correctly? Did this person just say what I think they said? What did they mean by that? Should I say something? Saying something's going to make it worse. They'll probably think I'm overreacting. Speaking up is going to hurt more than it helps. I don't know about you folks. I don't know about you Albany family, but when I look at this, my head hurts just looking at this slide. So imagine that this was your mindset coming into work every day. If you were actually experiencing microaggressions and it was unaddressed. So, okay. Responding, why, how, and things to consider. I even choose to respond. In most cases, workplace microaggressions go unaddressed, and most people do not confront them. As I can understand, they can be uncomfortable, or you just might not know the best way to respond. But I will say that addressing microaggressions can help the other person or people involved to realize that they may be acting on bias and get them to possibly alter their behavior. Confronting microaggressions also can send a message and sets the norm that of what's going to be acceptable in the workplace and what's not. and that behavior or those statements are not acceptable or in the workplace or anywhere else. So if we can begin to effectively both work to avoid committing them as well as properly addressing them when they do occur, it can make it less likely that others around you will do or say the same thing. So on a macro level, and this is for organizations to think about, I would say on a macro level, just modeling a culture of respect. Respect is central to this conversation. So with everything you do, model a culture of respect. I would argue to be difference conscious, and pardon the ableist term here, but not difference blind. Be aware of differences, not ignoring them. Folks, I think this, I don't see color, I treat everyone the same. I think folks genuinely think they're meaning well when they say that, but that's not where we want to be. I want you to see my color. I want you to see my sexual orientation. I want you to see my gender identity. I want you to go the step further of understanding me. And then I want you to kind of operate from there and helping to create a more inclusive workplace. So be difference conscious, not blind to differences. Model the organizational values relative to DEI. Many of you in this call right now, I bet you if I went on your organization's website, there's some statement somewhere about how important DEI is. That can't just be a box checking statement online. It has to live itself out in interactions and how the organization works day to day. So model organizational values, particularly if you're espousing to them online. Developing an action-based and outcome-based DEI plan. So those are some things organizations can do. On an individual level, I would say before even choosing to respond to a microaggression, ask yourself some questions and try to understand both your role and your goal. What do you hope to achieve? Is the nature of your relationship with the aggressor, for lack of a better term, what is your relationship to them and any possible bystanders that may have overheard this? I will say this, I'd like to acknowledge that we should not always completely work around the apparent fragility of others, but I have noticed that when your goal is to affect someone's bias, I found personally that the most effective responses are usually polite rather than hostile and focus on the positive qualities rather than accusations of prejudice. So that, you get more bees with honey. Again, depending on the situation, depending on how egregious the behavior is, I've noticed the polite approach of actually looking out for the partner and say, hey, you said this or you did that. And I just want to give you a heads up as to why that could be problematic. On a micro level, I would say that intervention should be clear, direct, and respectful. But a few micro level interventions are inquiry, where you just ask the person, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or can you expand on that a little bit more? Sometimes that gets the person to realize that what they're saying might be problematic. Another tactic is paraphrasing or reflecting, where you absorb what you think you're hearing from the person and kind of say it back to them. So what I think I'm hearing you say is this. And sometimes that paraphrasing, reflecting, and putting it back on that person gets them to realize that what they said or just did might be problematic or offensive. Interrupting and reframing sometimes, depending on the situation, if something's being said, and particularly where there's others involved, you need to interrupt the behavior, reframe that conversation, and come back to it. I have this on my notes, use I statements, rather than say, you said this, and you're discriminatory, and you have to watch what you say. That's going to put folks on the defensive. But if you use I statements and say, in that meeting the other day, when I heard you say that, this is how I felt when I heard that, and this is how I felt for the rest of the afternoon. It's a lot harder to challenge folks based when they're speaking from the I, because they're speaking from personal experience. And sometimes revisiting a situation completely where, it was a professor, shared a story with me where something was said, but it was right at the end of class. Half of the students were out the door. The other half were putting their book bags on, and the student said something that was offensive. And in that moment, the logistically just didn't seem effective to address it. But at the next class session, the professor was able to kind of come back and say, something happened at the end of class last time, and I'd like to come back to that and revisit it. Sometimes that approach, offers you the chance to kind of collect your thoughts on how to approach. Some additional strategies that I would like to promote, and again, this might sound corny in the workplace, but I've done it in higher ed and it works. And if you can kind of just get over the quirkiness of it and actually use it, it's simple. But the ouch, oops, Ouch, oops is a simple agreement that we enter to as coworkers where if something is said that is offensive or done that is offensive, the other person who's offended simply just says, ouch. Then the person who's made this comment says, oops. And that's like a public verbal acknowledgement that somebody was hurt and that somebody realizes that hurt has happened. But it doesn't end there. Those two parties are encouraged to at some point get together and discuss where the friction or where the discriminatory or the rub was. So ouch, oops. Again, one person says ouch, the other person says oops. That's an acknowledgement that something happened, and then folks need to get together and discuss that. Focus on monitoring smaller behaviors. Very often it's smaller things that can bubble up. Bystanders, there's often bystanders there who have the power to intervene. So I want to empower those, even if the statement or the behavior is not happening directly to you, you have the power to intervene. But I will say that if the behavior is persistent and personal, there is a line that can be crossed, which warrants reaching out to a supervisor or HR for resources to address ongoing behavior. Additionally, if the negative behavior is persistent and can be shown is related to a certain aspect of a person's identity, in some cases, it can rise to a level of legal harassment. For example, New York state law, as I'd imagine many other states, has several protected classes. And if an unfair or harassing environment is experienced by an individual on the basis of one of those protected classes, there can be some potential legal ramifications to these behaviors. So again, things to consider when looking to potentially address. Stay with me, folks, okay? Some strategies and some examples, response strategies I'm gonna give. Appeal to someone's values. Express your feelings. Get the person to explain. Empathize with the underlying feeling. Give information where possible. Sometimes people make a microaggressive statement that's just factually incorrect. Use humor. Wow, you sound like my grandpa. Involve others. Did you hear that? You know, bringing somebody else in on the conversation. Or a nonverbal response. Sometimes rolling your eyes or simply walking away. These are all potential strategies that you can use to address microaggressions. Most people do feel negative emotions when they're confronted, but can still learn from that experience. But be aware if you're about to confront that some reactions could include anger, denial, dismissal or minimization of your feelings, feeling that they are being attacked now, claiming it was a joke, trying to explain your misinterpretation of what they said or did, guilt or shame, freezing or closing up, trying to get others to agree with them, and hopefully at some point landing to apologizing and trying to make up for it. So again, I believe a copy of this presentation will be available. So if you didn't have a chance to write all of those down, there's no need. Okay. When microaggressions occur, and they inevitably will, and this is, again, partially due to the multicultural nature of many of our workplaces, if you experience one, I would encourage you to find a way to address it. Quite often, microaggression can be made by a single person, but you can hold them accountable. When possible, it is likely a good idea to approach them and talk to them in person before considering filing a complaint. This approach attempts to mitigate the conflict, where actually quite often, all you might be asking for is a simple apology and a commitment to correcting the behavior in the future. But be aware that you don't need to indefinitely turn the other cheek or be the bigger person. So if the behavior does continue, be aware that more formal channels are available to you, if any. Be aware of what the formal channels are to you available, if any. I would suggest taking the time to write down your thoughts. This can be a good way to recall the incident in a more calm and relaxed manner. You may be able to recall all the times where you were microaggressed, invalidated, or stereotyped by others. And this can also help to document the situation if you decide to file a formal complaint. Questions you can ask yourself through this process, again, if you've experienced a microaggression, is to think about a time where you faced a microaggression. How did you feel after it? Did it affect your mental health or self-esteem? And what did you wish you would have done or said to the perpetrator? Now, leading up to the possible intervention, I would say take a deep breath. Identify some individuals you feel comfortable discussing the issue with, whether it be a family member or a mentor. To the best degree possible, try to assume that offense was not the intent. Take a moment to explain how the comment or slight could be interpreted by other people, and ask follow-up questions like, who were you referring to when you said that, or what did you mean by that? If the perpetrator, again, for lack of a better term, denies being offensive, you'll ask yourself a few questions. Will further conversations even be beneficial and productive? What is your current level of stress? And how can you respond to this in a clear way? If you decide to go further, I would say express again that you're not blaming or challenging this person. Rather, you're only expressing the way that that comment or action made you feel. Try to impress upon them that instances like this can occur on a daily basis, and that others may have made similar comments, and try to be open to their input and expression of their feelings. Now, if you've committed one, if you've been the perpetrator or committed one, it can be quite natural, I will say, for individuals to fail to align their words with their actions, behaviors. I'm sorry, let me start that over. It can be quite natural for individuals to fail to align their words, actions, and behaviors with their core beliefs and ideologies. It is quite likely that many of us on this call have actually committed microaggressions in the workplace or elsewhere, but there can be ways to rectify these often unintentional acts. And I'd like to promote the idea that we should approach these situations as opportunities to learn and grow together. Also, be willing to recognize the role that privilege may have played in the situation, and commit to listening to marginalized folks' concern, and where appropriate, admit that you've made a mistake. So some other advice, and I won't go into too much depth for if you've committed one, but don't react defensively. Listen with an empathetic heart, acknowledge pain you've caused, apologize. I'm going to say this part twice because it's so important, and this is particularly important for leaders and supervisors. Educate yourself, raise your awareness. We live in a globally connected world where a lack of awareness can no longer be the excuse. Again, I'm going to say that again for the folks in the back who may not have heard that. We live currently in a globally connected world where a lack of awareness can no longer be the excuse. There are several resources online, including this webinar, that can be used to educate yourselves on the experiences of others in marginalized communities. Stand up for coworkers, update company policies, create awareness through training. Again, these are all things that leaders or supervisors can do. Okay, some additional concepts I'd like to cover as we kind of round third base here. I'd like to, intent versus impact. That's a huge one. And some of you, particularly in the DEI space, may have heard this intent versus impact. Some, I think, when they commit a microaggression, will try to get off easy by saying it was a joke or I didn't mean it that way. I think that that approach is focusing on the intent, but we need to be discussing the impact, right? Listen, if you step on my foot by accident, it still hurts. So focus on the harm, not the motivations behind the behavior. You step on my toe and you're walking by in the hallway and you say, sorry, I accept your apology. Or if you said, I didn't mean that, okay, I know you didn't mean it. I know it was an accident, but it still hurts. And I think quite often we're focusing on someone's intentions rather than the impact that those intentions have had. Communication involves two parties. There's a sender and a receiver, and the sender of the communication does not get to define how the receiver receives, interprets, and responds. So intent versus impact, we need to be focusing on the impact, not so much the intent. Another concept is called cumulative impact. Well, while this may be the first time that you have maybe made a microaggressive comment or engaged in microaggressive behavior toward a specific individual, it might be the 7,000th time that that individual has heard that comment said to them. The cartoon video that I showed, showed the woman going ballistic on the mosquitoes, and others thought that that was an overreaction. But what they don't realize is that these comments, sometimes people are experiencing them on a daily basis, even though you might be the first person that said it to them. So it seems like they're overreacting, but they have experience with this thing. We must allow people to be the experts of their own lived experiences. Again, I'll say that one again. We have to allow the space for people to be the experts of their own lived experiences. It's not my job to tell a trans person how they should be feeling or thinking. I don't identify as trans. I can try hard to understand and have empathy, but I have to allow that lived experience to be the expert in their own life and not project my thoughts and feelings on them. And then the power of the bystander. I just think so often, so many of these comments and behaviors are done and said when there's a third party or someone else in the room. And I want to, again, stress that the addressing and the confronting of these behaviors does not only have to be done by the individual experiencing them. There can be others who support and address it as well. Let's see. All right. I think we're actually going to be able to leave some time for questions. So I'm coming up on the end of my slides here. Just a few more. Remaining on a path of cultural competency, why it's so important. Cultural competency refers to one's ability to understand and respect people, includes respecting beliefs, customs, norms, and values from people of different backgrounds. So I do want to talk on a couple of points here. The importance of inclusive language and encourage mind shifts that I'd like to encourage you all today. The importance of inclusive language. I had a handbook, the Inclusive Language Handbook, shared with me as I visited the great folks at the Diversity Movement. The Diversity Movement is a DEI consultation firm based out of Raleigh, North Carolina. And on a visit recently with some other DEI colleagues, we had this resource shared with us, and it's by Jackie Ferguson and Roxanne Bellamy, and it's called the Inclusive Language Handbook. So I'm going to read a little bit from there. But what is inclusive language and why does it matter? In the book, Ferguson and Bellamy state, inclusive language is the daily practice of communicating intentionally using unbiased words that acknowledge diversity, convey respect, and support an environment of equitable opportunity. The words daily practice are critical to this definition. Inclusive language is not simply an idea or an aspiration. It comes to life and generates impact only when it's routinely practiced in everyday workplace conversations and written communications. Consistent use of inclusive language can have a significant positive impact on a company's culture, performance, and profitability. Why? Because language shapes human relationships and people are at the heart of organizations. So using inclusive language honors each person's diverse identity, making them feel welcomed, valued, and empowered to do their best work. Productive collaboration is driven by inclusive communication, as is teamwork and trust. And sometimes it's the small patterns of our daily lives that subtly reinforce exclusion and discrimination. So practicing inclusive language helps to reduce or eliminate these microaggressions. And again, they can be, whether they're slight, snubs, or insults, or inadvertent, they stem from usually a speaker's unexamined linguistic habits and can be steeped in deeper prejudice and can contribute to a sense of inequality in corporate culture. So that is the importance of inclusive language. And again, if you want to look up an Inclusive Language Handbook, it's by Jackie Ferguson and Roxanne Bellamy. And then I want to say the encourage mind shifts. And I want to give a shout out to Brother Greg Owens. Brother Greg Owens is a deacon at a church up here in Capital Region and a colleague of mine. And he used some of these points under a different context, but I found these points so powerful that I kind of pivoted them and borrowed them for a DEI context. But again, so shout out to Greg Owens for this. But, some of the mind shifts or pivots that I think we need are, I would argue that we need to move from lenses to mirrors, Quite often, we're entering the workplace and we're looking at a person or a team member or a colleague through a lens, right? Oh, here comes this person with their problems, or, oh, what is this person going to have to share with me today? It's like we're crafting the scenario before it even happens through a lens. And I would argue to turn that lens to a mirror and reflect on how you can be the best person and lead with empathy. So, rather than looking at a person or a community through a lens of the problem that you're there to fix, reflect on how you can be the best supervisor, colleague. Again, move from a lens to a mirror. I would argue also another needed mind shift or encouraged mind shift is trying to move trying to move relationships from transactional to transformational. Quite often in the workday when we're busy, we're rallying off things at meetings, we're sending out emails, and those lots of those interactions can be transactional, right? Where you're just needing to get that information that you need to from that person. But these relationships and these interactions have the power to be transformational rather than transactional if we allow them to, and if we kind of, again, lean into the empathy needed. And then I would say another one, and again, shout out to Greg Owens, move from problem solving to possibility creating. I think that managers and particularly folks who are newer to the DEI journey these last few years are like, oh my gosh, there's so much we have to do. Where do we even begin? And look at DEI as a problem. DEI doesn't need to be a problem. It can create possibilities for your organization. So it's just, again, a needed mind shift. I think I'm going to have to skip over that last piece based on time, but those are some kind of closing comments. And I will say this before I take a Q&A, that remember, and some of you may have seen this, the cultural iceberg. When you're meeting someone, what's primarily in awareness, right, is above the waterline. It's how the person dresses, the food they eat, the music they listen to. But what more makes up somebody and what more encompasses what they are is harder to see and is below the waterline and is out of our awareness and takes more deliberate, intentional effort to get to know these folks. So again, just understand that when you're meeting and interacting with somebody, you're usually only interacting with this top piece, this very minimal part of who they are and what makes them who they are. And it's in our best interest to get to know people on this deeper level. The same holds true for organizations. You might see how, the dress code is, I'd see the people, the amenities, but what you don't know is all of these lesser visible things, the core values, the work ethic, the mission. And then for my hiring colleagues, there's one here also on when you're interviewing somebody, you often have their race, age, gender available to you through their resume or through seeing them on screen. But what you don't know are these other things. And these things below the waterline that are harder to see make up more of the person and can be contributing to how they experience the workplace. So getting to know people on a deeper level is so important. Okay, folks, I'm going to land my plane here. But today I challenge you all to think, if we were doing this in person, I would leave you with, after hearing this, after hopefully raising your awareness about what microaggressions are and who experiences them, you might be saying, oops, I've actually said or done some things, or now I know how to address it. But I would ask you today, and you don't need to, if we have time in your responses, you can throw them in the chat, but listening today, what's one thing you're going to stop doing or saying, one thing you're going to start doing or saying, and one thing you're going to continue to do or say based on your raised awareness? And again, there is one last YouTube video, but we'll skip over that one in the interest of time. I want to thank these three organizations for supporting the Chamber's DEI work. Business for Good, CDPHP, and KeyBank have each invested lots of resources, lots of financial resources into our Chamber, specifically for our DEI work. So it's refreshing in this time when so many companies are pulling back or wiping out their DEI resources, that we have organizations in our region that are doubling down on these efforts and continue to prioritize them. So I want to thank Business for Good, CDPHP, and KeyBank. I will take questions and comments, but before I do that, here's my email, my LinkedIn, and here our Capital Region Chamber Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion resource page. There's a ton of resources on there, including a downloadable toolkit. For those that are in this area, we are offering the fuller in-person 2-hour version of this workshop on April 5th. So you can go to send me an email if you'd like to attend that if you're in the Capital Region, and also look out for the Chamber to continue to do DEI resources and events, including our annual summit, which is our largest DEI event of the year, which happens in the fall in September. So again, I said a lot. I'm going to stop there. I appreciate you all, my Great Dane family, my EOP family, Albany family. It's been a phenomenal experience, and I'm happy to take some questions, comments, and I will stop sharing.
We do have quite a few questions in the Q&A, so we'll jump right in, Jason. Thank you. Eric asks, how can we as allies respond to those who dismiss the legitimate work of DEI as woke without being defensive?
Oh, that is a multi-leveled question there. I will say this. There's a lot of noise right now, and I think it's going to get louder as we go into November around what DEI is and what it isn't. I think there are many that have DEI mislabeled and misinterpreted. It's not trying to make your organization woke or that kind of thing. It's doing what you already do and then bringing a lens of diversity and inclusion to that. So it's not about cutting up the pie and redistributing the pie necessarily. That is needed in some places, but it's just about looking at your marketing, your hiring. Diversity is not going anywhere, folks. It's not going anywhere. Let's just look at people. Forget about policies and procedures and laws. People, diverse people are not going anywhere. And in fact, we're getting more diverse every day. So if you're an organization and a leader that wants to stay sustainable and wants to stay have a competitive advantage, you have to begin to wrap your mind around this because it's not going anywhere. So for those that push back and say DEI is a woke agenda, I try to remove the politicized talking points out of the conversation and focus on the work and what it means and how you get it done. And it's, the business case for DEI can be argued. It's more of a talent issue, right? So if you focus it and frame it around a talent issue, where if a company wants to stay sustainable, they need to be able to hire more diverse people and onboard them. So I would try to use some of those talking points with that individual and try to get them to realize that it's not about being woke, it's about impacting your bottom line and having your company be more profitable and inclusive.
All right, great. We have a number of comments really in the Q&A, not so much questions. Somebody mentioning they love that idea of transactional to transformational and building relationships with each other to learn from each other. Carla has a question. This question has power dynamics in mind. How can one effectively and authentically raise concerns in a group setting when addressing issues affecting vulnerable members of our society, especially when doing so may involve taking a risk or sticking one's neck out? We had kind of another similar question where someone was asking, how do I ask my boss to use more inclusive language in his communications? I'm not sure he's going to be receptive. So, again, that power balance is a little bit in question here.
Yeah, with so much of this work, and I've been doing DEI work, 15 years or so, I don't have the magic answer to everything. And every situation is complex and unique. And power dynamics are certainly at play in every workplace. What I've tried to do in those situations is if you feel that your lack of power, for lack of a better term, your lack of power in the organization or positionality in the organization does not allow you the credibility to address this senior leader. I found that if you can find a senior leader or a colleague that they do listen to or that they do respect and get through to them, that at times, and I hate that we have to be tricky with this, where we have to kind of work around, through, or over, but that's what DEI does, right? We adapt. Try to engage a colleague that does agree with you, that person might listen to, and get them to influence them. That is a strategy. And I don't want to put heterosexual middle-aged white men on blast, but in my experience, particularly in the workforce, middle-aged heterosexual white men will listen to other middle-aged heterosexual white men, sometimes more quickly and with more engagement and openness than if it was somebody younger and browner. So sometimes that is one way. And then also assess if there's actual policies that are being violated, right? I think many times folks don't realize that interaction by the water cooler or somewhere else, those are still protected. And if the person is saying something based on your protected class, assess if an actual policy has been violated and go to HR, know what the procedures are and how to report that. And sometimes it's just making a record where you report it. That person's supervisor talks to that person. They don't share with you what was done, but a note is on file now that this person has done that and has been talked to. So again, if we were in a fuller 2-hour version, I'd be able to kind of go back and forth and brainstorm other tactics, but those are some of the tactics I would say to address that that power dynamics are always there, but we still need to be able to hold those in power accountable. And you just have to find the right way, whether it's using another colleague or, assessing your policies.
Okay, great. Tiana mentions microaggressions also commonly happen based on age and ageist ideas, and you look good for your age, you get around pretty good for your age, and basically says if it ends with for your age, it's likely a microaggression. So
yes, or I've heard a lot. You're pretty for a black girl. I've heard that from some. Anything that says for and then singles out an identity is probably going to be problematic. But yes, there's a lot of ageism that goes on. I think the ageism can work in both directions. And we're at a unique time given the flexible nature of work and remote, where I just read the other day that up to 4 generations can be working in the same organization, in the same workplace, 4 different generations. And each of those generations has a different way that they communicate, that they like to be communicated with. They have, ways in which they like to engage, and trends that kind of guide their behavior. So I would say to kind of do some research into multi-generational workplaces, and again, raise your awareness. Again, in my slide earlier, I said we live in a connected world where lack of awareness can no longer be the excuse. We have to be able to really understand, take your time as a leader, as a leader of others, as a leader in your organization, take your time to, research this and understand how it plays out in the workplace.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, working in a university setting, I'm working with 20-year-olds all the time, and there's no question they approach things differently, they talk differently, they communicate differently, and so constantly educating myself on how to interact with those different groups, and I'm sure vice versa. So not everyone is so lucky to work in those sort of diverse settings, though. Okay, I think probably our last question, because we are running out of time, but someone noted that after the Supreme Court decision last year, in many agencies, companies, it has influenced legal and those as hiring agents to change and hold back on all the work in trying to move DEI forward and improve representation. How can DEI officers continue to be effective in our outreach, recruiting, and hiring processes, and convince this is good business practice and not reverse discrimination? Big question.
Cool. There's a lot there, and I know we're at 1 o'clock, so I respect people that have to get off. But I will say is that in history, right, any time in history that progress is happening and we as a society are moving forward, there's going to be efforts and people that are clawing at that effort to hold it back and pull it back. And we're seeing that in regards to affirmative action, in regards to reproductive rights. So what I would say is I've spoken to some colleagues that have told me, Jason, we're still DEI is still a priority, but we had to link up with our legal team to look at the statements online to make sure that we're not opening ourselves up to litigation, but we're still going to achieve the goals of a diverse, hiring round or a diverse bringing on of employees. So I think, again, it sucks that we're in this place, but as DEI practitioners, we have to almost double think and double strategize and anticipate the pushback and figure out a way to still get through to our goals. So I think, yes, some of the policies that say we specifically like to hire Black women, or, if your policy is giving applicants of color favor, in the hiring process because they're underrepresented, those are the policies that are being challenged. But I think the spirit and the argument for having an inclusive workplace is still an important one, is still a salient one, and still can be made. So I think educating, raising awareness, continuing to promote why an important workplace is important. And then I think you may have to adjust how you get there based on the legal landscape of where we are. But I would encourage DEI practitioners to don't feel like you have to take your foot off the pedal. Like, now is the time when we're being challenged that we have to push even more. It might look a little bit different. We might have to operate a little bit more deliberately, carefully, but we can still achieve these goals.
Well, fabulous. Jason, thank you so much. Really, you packed an awful lot into 1 hour. I know there's more you wanted to get to, but Thank you for coming today and sharing with us. Thank you for all the work you're doing in our community. We truly appreciate everything that you're doing. And thank you to everybody who joined us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Melissa, Albany family, EOP family. I appreciate you, and I'm sending much love and virtual respect and empathy out to you all. So reach out to me if there's anything I can help with. And it's just been great to share some time with you all today.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.